Have you ever walked alone at night and heard someone calling your name? A voice so clear, so familiar, yet when you turn around, there is no one there. Do you believe it's just your imagination, or is something truly watching you? This story took place in the winter of 2017 in a small town in Pennsylvania, USA. Our protagonist, Michael, was a college student living alone in a small apartment near the outskirts of a forest. He loved the quiet, often choosing empty streets to walk home. But on one fateful night, he encountered something beyond explanation. The fateful night. That night, Michael left the cafe where he worked at around 11 p.m. The winter air was freezing, his breath turning to mist. The streets were nearly deserted, with only a few streetlights flickering weakly. Everything seemed normal until he took a shortcut through a narrow alley. As he entered, something felt off. The air was heavier, his footsteps sounded unnaturally loud, almost as if they were echoing from somewhere else. And then he heard it. Michael. A soft voice, coming from behind him. It was unmistakable, his mother's voice. But she was hundreds of miles away. How could she be here? Michael stopped, his heart pounding. He turned around. Nothing. Just empty streets and the looming shadows of trees. He swallowed hard, trying to convince himself it was just his tired mind playing tricks on him. Shaking his head, he walked forward again. But only seconds later, the voice returned, closer this time. Michael, don't go. He froze. This wasn't an echo. It was speaking directly to him. A cold shiver crawled up his spine. He didn't turn around this time. Every instinct in his body told him to run. Michael took off sprinting. He ran through the empty alleyways, feeling an unseen presence right behind him. As he neared his apartment, his breath caught in his throat, his window lights were already on. He was sure he had turned them off before leaving. The strange message. Michael burst through the door and slammed it shut. His apartment was empty. No one was there. But the living room light was on. He checked the windows, still locked. There were no signs of forced entry. Still panting, he pulled out his phone to call his mother. But before he could dial, a message popped up. Mom, are you okay? I just had a strange dream. I heard someone calling your name. Michael felt his blood run cold. He looked around his apartment, his skin crawling. Outside his window, the night was darker than before. And in the howling wind, he could still hear the whisper. Michael. Michael stood frozen in his apartment. His mother's message still glowed on the screen, the words digging into his mind like icy claws. His entire body felt cold, not from the winter air, but from the overwhelming sense that someone, or something, was here with him. The wind outside howled, seeping through the cracks, creating eerie whispers. The silence in the room was deafening. His eyes landed on the mirror standing across from his bed. He had bought it from an old thrift store near campus, a vintage piece, slightly scratched but elegant. Tonight, however, as he stared into it, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. His reflection was turning its head toward him. Michael's heart nearly stopped. He didn't move, but his reflection did. Slowly, so painfully slow, until its eyes locked onto his. And those eyes were not his own. They were sunken, hollow pits of darkness, staring back at him with an eerie, knowing smile. Michael stumbled backward, but the reflection didn't follow. It stayed there, watching. Then, darkness. The power cut out. There was no warning. No flickering lights, no surge. Just sudden, suffocating blackness. Michael's pulse pounded in his ears as he fumbled for his phone. The moment his screen lit up. Tap. A sound echoed from the bathroom. Michael froze. The door was shut. He was sure nothing inside could make that sound. But there it was. Tap. Tap. It was coming from the mirror inside the bathroom. Michael swallowed hard. His breath came in short, uneven gasps. He stepped forward, hesitating at the bathroom door. Through the narrow gap beneath it, he could see something reflecting in the mirror. A shadow. Standing perfectly still. It didn't move. It didn't shift. It was simply waiting. Michael stepped back. His instincts screamed for him to run, but something inside him couldn't look away. He reached out, fingertips brushing the cold metal of the doorknob. The moment he touched it, the door swung open. The shadow was gone. But on the mirror, written in fog, were chilling words. "I found you." Michael staggered back, his body shaking. His phone buzzed violently in his hand. A new message flashed on the screen. "Unknown number, don't turn around." Michael felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. And then, the whisper returned. "Michael." Michael's body went rigid. The icy breath at the nape of his neck felt too real to ignore. His phone screen still glowed, the message burning into his mind. "Don't turn around." But someone, was right behind him. The silence was deafening. His heartbeat pounded like a drum in his ears. He tried to steady his breathing, to convince himself that it was all in his head. Maybe he was just imagining things. Maybe it was just his fear taking over. And then, he heard it. "Michael." A voice. Low. Hoarse. Like it was coming from somewhere far away. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a neighbor's voice. It was calling his name. Michael held his breath. He knew that if he turned around, he would see something he wasn't supposed to see. But he couldn't just stand there forever. Slowly, he raised his phone and switched to selfie mode. The screen flickered slightly, and then there was something behind him. A shadowy figure, towering over him. Not entirely solid, but undeniably there. And worse. It had no eyes. Michael's scream died in his throat. Before he could react, an unseen force yanked him backward. His phone slipped from his hands, crashing onto the floor with a sharp crack. The shattered screen still glowed, reflecting a pair of skeletal hands gripping his shoulders. The air turned unbearably cold. He could feel sharp, claw-like fingers pressing into his skin. And then, the voice spoke again. "Stop running." Michael suddenly remembered his mother's warning. "If you ever hear someone call your name at night, don't answer." But it was too late. The shadow leaned in, its breath freezing against his ear. "You are mine now." Michael hit the floor, his breath ragged, fingers trembling as he reached for his cracked phone. But the second he touched the screen, the lights went out. Total darkness. His heartbeat thundered in his chest. He couldn't see a thing, but he knew, it was still there. Somewhere in the room, something scraped against the wall. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Then, a whisper. Soft, but echoing. "Open the door." Michael froze. He had locked his front door. But the voice wasn't talking about that door. There was another door. His apartment was small, one bedroom, one bathroom. But in the corner stood a built-in closet he rarely used. And somehow, he knew the thing in the dark wanted him to open it. Michael tried to stand, but his legs felt like dead weight. He clutched his phone, its dim light flickering, and aimed it toward the corner of the room. The closet door was slightly open. No one had touched it. There was no draft. But it had just moved. Then, from inside the closet. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow knocks. Not forceful. Not urgent. But unmistakable. Something was inside. A voice followed, this time closer. "Open the door, Michael." His teeth clenched. He could not let this thing speak his name. He remembered the old stories: if an entity calls your name at night, it's trying to bind itself to you. If you respond, if you acknowledge it, you belong to it. But Michael had already made a mistake. And now, the closet door was opening wider. A hand slipped out, thin, unnaturally long fingers, blackened and claw-like. It crept out of the darkness, slowly, savoring his fear. Michael couldn't take it anymore. He scrambled to his feet, lunging for the front door, yanking the handle with all his strength. It wouldn't budge. Behind him, a low chuckle rippled through the silence, cold, hollow. "You can't leave, Michael." And then, thud. The closet door swung wide open. And the darkness poured out. The darkness swallowed him. Michael barely had time to react. A wave of icy cold air rushed past him, stabbing into his skin like needles. And then, a chuckle. Soft. Right behind him. It was standing right behind him. His grip tightened on the doorknob. The lock wouldn't budge. And then, something moved in the dark. Step. A single footstep. Slow. Step. Closer. Michael's breath hitched. He knew he couldn't turn around. He couldn't look. But then, a hand rested on his shoulder. Cold. Too long. Fingers sharp enough to dig into his skin. It wasn't just cold, it was draining the warmth from his body. Then, the voice came again. But this time, it wasn't whispering. It was right in his ear. "Michael. I see you." A shiver ran down his spine. How did it know his name? And before he could react, the darkness pulled him in. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. His body felt like it was falling. He thrashed, but there was nothing to grab onto. And then, thud. He hit the ground. But, he wasn't in his apartment anymore. Where was he? Michael opened his eyes. In front of him was a forest. But not a normal one. The trees were unnaturally tall, their trunks twisting as if something had warped them. Everything was bathed in an eerie green glow, like this place wasn't meant for the living. In the distance, shadows moved between the trees. Then, a whisper, low and familiar. "You can't run, Michael." He spun around. It was standing right behind him. Michael froze. He didn't dare breathe. His heart pounded in his chest. The shadow behind him didn't move, but he could feel it watching him. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, like soil that had been buried for too long beneath layers of decaying leaves. Michael looked around, everything was unfamiliar. This forest had no end. The trees twisted together, their branches blocking out the sky. Shadows slithered between the trunks, moving as if they had no solid form. He had to get out. But where would he go? Michael swallowed, forcing himself not to panic. He took a step forward. And heard another step behind him. Step. Right behind him. He stopped. The sound stopped. He took another step. Step. Something was mimicking him. He took a shaky breath. "Who's there?" he asked, voice hoarse with fear. No answer. Just whispers echoing between the trees. Not one voice. But many. Dozens of voices murmuring together, tangled and distorted, speaking in a language Michael didn't understand. The words overlapped, like a cursed prayer being recited in unison. He couldn't stay here. He ran. But the forest had no exit. No matter how far he ran, he always ended up in the same place. The trees moved. The forest was alive. And then, in the midst of his panic, he saw it. A stone well, sitting in a small clearing. The stones around its rim were carved with strange symbols he couldn't read. Michael felt something pulling him toward it. He didn't want to get closer, but something in the well was calling him. A voice. A voice that sounded like his own. Michael. He swallowed hard. And then a hand reached out from the well and grabbed him. Michael was pulled down. He struggled, clawing at the stone walls, but the hand was too strong. The fingers were icy cold, the skin slimy, as if it belonged to something not of this world. He screamed, but the sound vanished into the void. Darkness swallowed him whole. Michael woke up in a strange place. No more trees. No sky. Only cold stone walls and dim, flickering blue torches mounted on the walls. He was no longer in the world above. And then he heard it. A breath. Deep. Heavy. Somewhere in the dark. Michael turned. And his blood ran cold. Something was crawling out from the shadows. Moving on all fours, its body jerking unnaturally. Its limbs twisted and bent in ways they shouldn't. And its face was his face. This is a dream, this can't be real. Michael staggered back, heart hammering in his chest. The creature grinned. Not a normal grin. His grin. But distorted. Devoid of humanity. Then, it opened its mouth. No sound came out. But Michael heard his own voice inside his head. You've come down here, you're never going back. Michael couldn't breathe. The darkness was thick, suffocating him like a living entity. The creature wearing his face crawled closer. Its eyes rolled white, its mouth twisted into an inhuman grin. Then, it started speaking. Not with words. But with whispers echoing inside his skull. Do you know where you are? You're not the first to fall down here. And you won't be the last. Michael shook his head violently. Shut up. You're not me. Laughter filled the void. Not from one direction. But from everywhere. And then Michael realized. It wasn't alone. The darkness around him began to shift. Shapes emerged from the void. Figures that looked human, but weren't. Each of them wore a different face. The faces of those who had fallen before. Trapped. Consumed. Now, they were nothing but empty echoes. Michael stumbled back, horrified. But behind him, a cold hand grabbed his shoulder. He turned. Another face. His face. And it said, "Now it's your turn." Michael tried to rip himself free from the icy hand gripping his shoulder, but it held too tight. Everything around him was whispering. Dozens of voices. Hundreds of voices. They surged over him like invisible waves, drowning his thoughts. Stay with us. Forever. Michael gritted his teeth, his fingers instinctively reaching into his pocket. The lighter. He flicked it on. A small flame flickered to life. And in that moment, he saw it. A door standing alone in the abyss. No walls. No floor. Just a door, floating in nothingness. And the worst part. It was open. Michael lunged for the door without hesitation. But the hands wouldn't let him go. They grabbed his legs, pulling him back. The flame in his hand wavered, dimming. He had to do something. He had to escape. With every ounce of strength, Michael threw himself forward, lunging into the doorway. The darkness swallowed him whole. He was falling. Cold. Water. Michael was sinking. Where was he? He struggled, kicking and thrashing, trying to swim up. Up. But where was up? All around him was blackness. Was he really swimming toward the surface? Or was he actually sinking deeper? Michael thrashed in the endless darkness. The air in his lungs was running out. He couldn't tell which way was up or down. The whispers were still there. Forever. Stay with us. But this time, they weren't just whispers. They were singing. A haunting melody, echoing through the void. Michael felt it. A hand grazing his face. He panicked, kicking wildly, trying to break free. But the hand didn't let go. It caressed his face, almost lovingly. Then, his eyes flickered open. And he saw it. A face inches from his own. No eyes. No nose. Only a gaping mouth, stretching wide open. Singing. Michael screamed, but no sound came out. Water rushed into his mouth. He was sinking faster. A crushing weight dragged him deeper into the abyss. The door. Where was the door? He had to find it. Michael reached out, grasping at nothing. And then, another hand grabbed him. But this one was warm. Alive. A powerful force yanked him upward. Light. A glimmer of light above him. Another door. He stretched his hand. The darkness vanished. Michael gasped awake. He was lying on the floor, soaking wet. No more water. No more singing. Just the old room and an open window. Outside, the sun had risen high. But somewhere in the wind, a faint song still echoed. Forever. The echoes had not ended.